My name is Joshua, and 18 months ago I was living what I thought was a normal life as an accountant in Portland, Oregon. I had a small apartment, a steady job, and plans for the future that didn't include orange jumpsuits or concrete walls. Now I'm writing this from my cell in Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility, serving a sentence for embezzlement I didn't commit, trying to make sense of how everything went so wrong and so right. The frame-up was sophisticated, I'll give them that. Someone had been siphoning money from client accounts at Morrison Associates for months, creating a complex trail of false documentation that led straight back to me. By the time I realized what was happening, federal agents were at my door with a warrant. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures on transfer documents, a hidden offshore account in my name, even security foot building at times when the transfers occurred. My court-appointed lawyer was young and overwhelmed, going through the motions of a defense while clearly believing in my guilt. The prosecution painted me as a greedy young professional who'd gotten in over his head with gambling debts, a narrative supported by planted evidence in my apartment and fabricated witness statements. When the jury delivered their guilty verdict after just 6 hours of deliberation, I felt something fundamental break. Cedar Ridge was a medium-security facility, which meant I was surrounded by inmates whose crimes ranged from white-collar fraud to armed robbery. As a 26-year-old first-time offender convicted of a non-violent crime, I was what the other prisoners called fresh meat. Vulnerable, scared, and completely unprepared for the reality of prison life. The first few weeks were hell. I kept to myself as much as possible, speaking only when spoken to, trying to become invisible. But invisibility is hard to achieve when you're clearly out of place. I was too clean, too soft, too obviously middle class. The other inmates could smell my fear and inexperience like blood in the water. It was during my 3rd week that I first noticed Officer Nicholas Chen. He was younger than most of the guards, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of quiet authority that commanded respect without needing to be aggressive about it. While other guards seemed to view the inmates as barely human, Nicholas treated everyone with a professional courtesy that bordered on actual respect. I first spoke to him during a particularly bad day when 3 inmates had cornered me in the laundry room, making threats about what would happen if I didn't start paying for protection. I'd managed to slip away, but I was shaking so badly I could barely fold the industrial-sized sheets. "You okay, Williams?" Nicholas asked quietly, appearing beside me with the silent efficiency that seemed to be his trademark. "Fine," I lied, not looking up from the laundry. "Doesn't look fine to me." His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "Rodriguez and his crew giving you trouble?" I glanced up at him, surprised that he'd noticed the interaction. His dark eyes were studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can, but you shouldn't have to." Nicholas picked up a towel and began folding it with mechanical precision. "You're not like the others." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you don't belong here and everyone knows it, including me." The comment was so unexpected that I nearly dropped the sheet I was holding. Guards weren't supposed to express opinions about inmates' guilt or innocence. It wasn't their job to care whether we belonged here or not. "I was convicted by a jury," I said carefully. "Juries make mistakes." Nicholas finished folding the towel and added it to the stack. "I've been doing this job for 8 years. You learn to read people, to spot the difference between the guilty ones and the ones who got railroaded." "And what category do I fall into?" "You want my honest opinion? You're either the best actor I've ever met, or you got screwed by someone with a lot of resources and very little conscience." I stared at him, unsure how to respond. In the 3 weeks I'd been here, no one had suggested they believed in my innocence. Not my lawyer, not my family, not even my few friends who'd bothered to visit before gradually disappearing from my life. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Nicholas was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Because I've seen what happens to innocent people in places like this. They either get broken or they get hard. I'd rather not see either happen to you." That conversation marked the beginning of something I couldn't quite define. Nicholas began checking on me more frequently, always professionally, always with plausible reasons, but I could feel his attention like a weight. He'd appear when situations were getting tense, redirect aggressive inmates with quiet authority, and somehow always seemed to know when I was struggling. It was subtle at first, a nod of acknowledgement when our paths crossed, a few extra minutes during cell inspections when he'd ask how I was adjusting, small interventions that kept me safe without making it obvious to the other inmates that I was receiving special attention. But as the weeks passed, our interactions became more personal. "You're a reader," Nicholas observed one evening during rounds, noting the stack of books on my small table. I'd been devouring everything in the prison library, partly to escape my reality and partly because there wasn't much else to do. "Always have been," I said, looking up from the novel I'd been absorbed in. "Helps pass the time." "What's that one about?" I showed him the cover, a literary fiction novel about a man rebuilding his life after a personal tragedy. Guy loses everything and has to figure out how to start over. "Relevant," Nicholas said with what might have been a smile. "Yeah, well, I'm trying to stay optimistic about the whole starting over thing." "How much time do you have left?" 18 months if I keep my head down and don't lose any good behavior credits." Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. "That's not so long in the grand scheme of things." "Easy to say when you get to go home every night." "Fair point." He leaned against the cell door frame, a casual gesture that somehow felt intimate despite the circumstances. "What did you do before? Accounting. Worked for a small firm, mostly handling individual clients and small businesses. It was boring but stable." I set the book aside. "What about you? Always wanted to be a corrections officer?" Nicholas laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. "God, no. I was a social worker for a few years after college, working with at-risk kids, burned out on the bureaucracy and the feeling that I wasn't making any real difference." "And this makes a difference? Sometimes, when you can help someone who actually deserves help." His eyes met mine, and there was something in his expression that made my chest tight. "Most of the guys in here, they made their choices and they're dealing with the consequences, but occasionally you meet someone who's here because the system failed them." "And you think I'm one of those people?" "I know you are." The certainty in his voice was overwhelming. For months, I'd been surrounded by people who assumed my guilt, who treated me like a criminal because that's what the courts had declared me to be. Having someone look at me and see innocence instead of deception was like oxygen after months of suffocation. "Nicholas," I started, then stopped, unsure what I wanted to say. "Yeah? Thank you for, treating me like a human being." Something shifted in his expression, becoming softer and more vulnerable. "You don't need to thank me for that, Joshua." It was the first time he'd used my first name instead of my last name, and the intimacy of it sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with attraction, which was completely insane, of course. I was in prison, he was a guard, and getting involved with staff was against every rule in the book. Plus, I'd never been attracted to men before. My few serious relationships had all been with women, but there was something about Nicholas that drew me in despite every rational reason to maintain distance. Over the following weeks, our conversations grew longer and more personal. He lingered during evening rounds, asking about the books I was reading, sharing stories about his work with troubled kids, gradually revealing pieces of himself that I suspected he didn't share with many people. "Why did you really leave social work?" I asked one night, about 6 weeks into our strange friendship. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, leaning against the wall outside my cell in a way that blocked the view from the security cameras. "There was a kid, Marcus, 15 years old, in and out of foster care his whole life. Smart as hell, funny, just needed someone to believe in him." "What happened?" "I fought for him, pulled strings, bent rules, got him placed with a good family who wanted to adopt him, thought I'd finally made a real difference." Nicholas's voice was tight with old pain. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Drug overdose. Turns out the good family was running pills, and Marcus got caught in the middle of a deal gone wrong." "Jesus, Nicholas, I'm sorry." I blamed myself. If I'd been more careful, done more research, maybe seen the signs. He shook his head. "My supervisor said it wasn't my fault, that you can't save everyone, but that's the thing. I wasn't trying to save everyone, just him, and I failed." "So you came here instead?" "Figured if I was going to work in a system that was broken anyway, might as well be honest about it. At least here, nobody pretends it's about rehabilitation or helping people build better lives." "But you still try to help people, you help me." Nicholas looked at me for a long moment. You're different. How? You remind me that sometimes the system gets it wrong. That sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who seem like they need it the least. That night, after Nicholas continued his rounds, I lay awake thinking about our conversation. There had been something in his voice when he talked about the boy he tried to save, something that spoke of guilt and regret that went deeper than professional disappointment. And there had been something in the way he looked at me when he said I was different, something that made my heart race despite the impossibility of the situation. The next few weeks brought a dangerous shift in our relationship. Nicholas began visiting my cell later at night, after the other guards had finished their rounds. He'd appear at my door like a ghost, speaking in whispers that wouldn't carry to the neighboring cells. "Can't sleep?" he asked one night, finding me sitting on my narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. "Not really, too much thinking." "About what?" "About how I ended up here, about who did this to me and why." I sat up, making room for him to lean against the wall. "About what I'm going to do when I get out." "Any theories?" "About who set you up, I mean." It was a question I'd been wrestling with for months. Had to be someone with access to the firm's systems and knowledge of my work patterns, someone who could forge my signature convincingly and had the technical skills to doctor security footage. That narrows it down to about 3 people. My supervisor, Richard Morrison, but he owns the firm, so why would he steal from himself? There's Sandra Walsh, the senior partner, but she's been there for 15 years and has a spotless reputation. And then there's Trevor Hayes. Tell me about Trevor. I'd thought about Trevor countless times since my arrest, and every analysis led me to the same uncomfortable conclusion. He was hired 6 months before the embezzlement started, came with great references, seemed eager to prove himself. We worked on several of the affected accounts together. And he always seemed to know just a little too much about things he shouldn't have had access to, plus he was the one who discovered the discrepancies and reported them to Morrison. Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. Classic move, nothing deflects suspicion like being the one to report the crime. But I can't prove it. All the evidence points to me, and Trevor comes across as the concerned colleague who uncovered the fraud. Evidence can be manufactured, Nicholas said quietly. Trust me. I've seen enough cases to know that the obvious suspect isn't always the guilty one. We talked for another hour that night, and when Nicholas finally left, I realized that our conversations had become the highlight of my days. In a place where every interaction was fraught with potential danger, where showing weakness could be fatal, Nicholas offered something I'd thought was lost forever: genuine human connection. But it was more than that, and I was starting to admit it to myself. I was falling for him. The realization was terrifying not just because of where we were, but because it forced me to confront feelings I'd never experienced before. I'd dated women, had relationships that I thought were serious, but I'd never felt this kind of consuming attraction to another person. The way Nicholas moved, all controlled strength and quiet confidence, the way he listened when I talked, like every word mattered, the way he looked at me sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, with an intensity that made my skin burn despite the cool prison air. One night, about 3 months into my sentence, our carefully maintained boundaries finally crumbled. Nicholas had come by later than usual, around midnight, when the cell block was quiet except for the occasional snore or cough from neighboring cells. We'd been talking about books. He'd started bringing me novels from his personal collection, stories I never would have found in the prison library. This one's incredible, I said, holding up the paperback he'd given me the night before. I couldn't put it down. I thought you'd like it. It's about redemption, second chances, the possibility of rebuilding after everything falls apart. Sounds familiar, I said with a wry smile. Joshua, Nicholas said, and something in his voice made me look up sharply. He was standing closer to the cell door than usual, close enough that I could see the conflict in his dark eyes. What is it? I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand how complicated this is. My heart started racing. Okay. I've been doing research into your case. I mean, it's not something I should be doing, but I can't stop thinking about what you told me regarding Trevor Hayes. I sat up straighter. What kind of research? I have a friend who works in digital forensics for the state police. Off the books, he looked into the security footage that was used as evidence against you. And it was definitely tampered with. The metadata shows clear signs of digital manipulation, timestamps altered, frames spliced together from different recordings. Someone with serious technical skills went to a lot of trouble to make you look guilty. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Can your friend testify to that? Could this be grounds for an appeal? Maybe, but Joshua, there's something else. Nicholas moved even closer to the bars, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. I looked into Trevor Hayes' background, those references he came with. 2 of the companies don't exist anymore, and the third one has no record of ever employing him. Jesus Christ, so he's been operating under a false identity? Looks that way, which means he's done this before, probably multiple times. Set up shop at a firm, establish himself as a trustworthy employee, then embezzle funds and frame someone else to take the fall. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with fury. How do we prove it? That's where it gets complicated. Nicholas glanced down the corridor, making sure we were still alone. What I've done so far is already way outside my authority. If I take this to the warden or try to involve official channels, I could lose my job and face criminal charges for unauthorized investigation. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if we're going to clear your name, we need to be smart about it. We need irrefutable evidence and a way to present it that doesn't implicate me in illegal activity. The "we" in that sentence didn't escape my notice. Nicholas, why are you doing this? Why are you risking your career for me? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the cell bars with white knuckles. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I can't stand watching you suffer for something you didn't do. Because I've fallen in love with your mind, your strength, your refusal to let this place break you. He paused, meeting my eyes through the bars. And because I'm in love with you, which is the most inappropriate and complicated thing that's ever happened to me. The confession hung in the air between us like a live wire. I moved closer to the bars, close enough that our faces were only inches apart. Nicholas, I whispered, I know it's impossible. I know it's against every rule and regulation that exists. I know you're probably not even interested in men. And I know that even if you were, this situation is fucked up beyond belief. You're right, I said quietly, about most of that anyway. His face fell slightly. I figured as much. I just needed you to know in case something happens and I don't get another chance to tell you. You're right that it's impossible and complicated and against every rule, I continued, but you're wrong about me not being interested. Nicholas stared at me, his expression cycling through surprise, hope, and disbelief. I've never felt this way about anyone before, I admitted. Man or woman, I don't know if it's because of where we are or despite it, but I can't stop thinking about you, about what it would be like to touch you, to kiss you, to wake up next to you in a place that isn't here. Fuck, Nicholas breathed, his forehead coming to rest against the bars. I reached through the gap, my fingers finding his face, tracing the line of his jaw. He leaned into the touch like a man dying of thirst. This is insane, he whispered. Yeah, it is. If we get caught. I know. Joshua, I could lose everything. My job, my pension, my freedom if they decide to prosecute me for misconduct. Then we don't get caught. Nicholas pulled back slightly, studying my face in the dim light filtering in from the corridor. What are you saying? I'm saying that you're the first good thing that's happened to me in months. I'm saying that if you can find a way to prove my innocence, I'll owe you everything. And I'm saying that if you want to risk us, then so do I. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Nicholas reached through the bars, his hand cupping the back of my neck, and drew me forward until our lips met through the gap between the metal bars. The kiss was awkward because of the barrier between us, but it was also electric, desperate, full of months of suppressed longing. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. God, I've wanted to do that for so long, Nicholas murmured. Me too. From that night forward, our relationship changed completely. Nicholas would come to my cell after midnight, when the risk of discovery was lowest and we'd spend hours talking, planning, and stealing whatever physical contact we could manage through the bars. It was frustrating and thrilling and terrifying all at once. During the day, we maintained perfect professional distance. Nicholas treated me exactly like every other inmate, never giving any sign of the intimacy we shared in the darkness. But I could feel his awareness of me like a constant presence, and sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with an expression that made my heart race. Meanwhile, he continued investigating Trevor Hayes, using his connections and resources to build a case that could potentially overturn my conviction. It was dangerous work that required careful coordination and absolute secrecy. I found something Nicholas told me one night, about 2 weeks after our first kiss. He looked excited and nervous in equal measure. What? Trevor's real name is Marcus Sullivan. He's wanted by the FBI for similar schemes in 3 other states, but here's the interesting part. He made a mistake. What kind of mistake? He used the same offshore bank for your case that he used in Nevada 2 years ago. My friend in digital forensics was able to trace the account back to Sullivan's real identity. I felt a surge of hope so intense it was almost painful. Is that enough to reopen my case? It should be, but we need to be careful about how we present it. If it comes out that I've been conducting an unauthorized investigation, the evidence could be thrown out as fruit of the poisonous tree. So what do we do? Nicholas had clearly been thinking about this. We need to find a way to get this information to someone who can act on it officially. Someone who won't ask too many questions about how the evidence was obtained. Over the next few weeks, Nicholas worked his contacts, carefully placing information where it would be discovered by the right people. It was a delicate process that required patience and precision, but gradually, the wheels of justice began to turn. The first sign that something was happening came when my public defender called to schedule a meeting, the first time I'd heard from him in months. There have been some developments in your case, he said, looking simultaneously confused and excited. The FBI has reopened their investigation into the Morrison Associates embezzlement based on new evidence linking your case to similar crimes in other states. What kind of new evidence? I'm not privy to all the details yet, but apparently they've connected Trevor Hayes to a wanted fugitive named Marcus Sullivan. They're issuing warrants for his arrest and reviewing all the cases he was involved in. I tried to look surprised while my heart hammered with hope and relief. What does this mean for me? It means we might be looking at having your conviction overturned. If they can prove that Sullivan framed you as part of a larger pattern of fraud, the prosecution's case falls apart completely. That night, when Nicholas came to my cell, I could barely contain my excitement. It's working, I whispered. They're reopening the investigation. Nicholas smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. I heard. The warden got a call from the FBI today requesting access to your files. How long do you think this will take? Not long if the evidence is as solid as we think it is. The FBI doesn't like admitting they got it wrong, but they like being embarrassed by the media even less. If there's clear proof that you were framed, they'll move quickly to correct it. I reached through the bars, taking his hand in mine. Nicholas, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. I just want to see you free. And then what? When I get out, what happens to us? It was a question we'd both been avoiding, but it hung over every conversation like a storm cloud. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I've never been in this situation before. Hell, I've never been in love with a man before, let alone one I met while he was incarcerated. Are you ashamed of it? Of us? Ashamed? No, scared maybe. Confused about how to navigate it in the real world, but not ashamed. Nicholas squeezed my hand. Joshua, what we have is real. It's complicated as hell, but it's real. Then we'll figure it out, together. 3 weeks later, I was called to the warden's office and informed that my conviction had been overturned. The FBI had arrested Marcus Sullivan in Chicago, where he'd been setting up another fraudulent scheme. Faced with evidence of his crimes in 4 states, he'd confessed to framing me in exchange for a plea deal. You're a free man, Williams, the warden said, though he looked like the words tasted bitter in his mouth. Your record will be expunged, and the state will be in touch about compensation for wrongful imprisonment. I nodded, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. After 8 months in prison, The idea of freedom felt surreal. How soon can I leave? Processing will take a few hours. You should be out by this afternoon. As I was escorted back to my cell to collect my few belongings, I caught sight of Nicholas across the corridor. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw relief and something that might have been fear flash across his face. We couldn't speak. There were too many people around, too much risk of exposure, but I tried to convey everything I was feeling in that single glance. 3 hours later, I walked out of Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility, a free man, carrying a small bag of personal belongings and a head full of complicated emotions. The world outside seemed impossibly bright and loud after months of institutional gray and regulated quiet. I went to a hotel first, desperate for a shower that wasn't supervised and a bed that was actually comfortable. But all I could think about was Nicholas, still trapped inside those walls, still bound by the rules and regulations of his job. I waited 3 days before calling the facility, asking to speak with Officer Chen about a procedural matter related to my release. It was a flimsy excuse, but it got me through to him. Joshua? His voice was careful, professional, but I could hear the emotion underneath. Hi, can you talk? For a few minutes, are you? How are you adjusting? It's strange, good but strange, Nicholas, I need to see you. There was a pause. That's probably not a good idea. Please, just once, outside of that place, we need to talk about what happens now. Another pause, longer this time. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street near the river, Murphy's. I get off shift at 6. I'll be there. Murphy's turned out to be a small, dimly lit place with mismatched chairs and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation. I arrived early and claimed a corner table, my hands shaking slightly as I waited. When Nicholas walked in, still in his civilian clothes but somehow still carrying the authority of his position, I felt my heart stop. Seeing him outside the context of prison was jarring. He looked younger, less formidable, more human. Hi, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Hi. We stared at each other for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. This is weird, Nicholas finally said. Yeah, it is good weird, though. Is it? I keep thinking that without the circumstances that brought us together, we might never have. He gestured vaguely between us. You think what we felt was just because of the situation? I don't know, maybe prison does strange things to people, makes them form connections they wouldn't normally make. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. Nicholas, look at me. He did, his dark eyes uncertain. I've been free for 3 days. I've had time to think, to process everything that happened, and I'm more sure than ever that what I feel for you is real. It's not gratitude, it's not prison psychology, it's not some kind of Stockholm syndrome, it's love. Joshua, I know it's complicated. I know there are a million reasons why this is a bad idea, but I also know that you're the reason I survived in there, not just physically but emotionally. You gave me hope when I had none. You believed in my innocence when no one else would, and you risked everything to help me prove it. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you want to try, to see what we are when we're both free, when there are no bars between us, when we can touch each other without fear of getting caught. And if it doesn't work? If it turns out that what we felt was just the intensity of the situation? Then at least we'll know. But Nicholas, what if it does work? What if we're actually as good together in the real world as we were in that impossible place? He looked at me for a long time, and I could see him weighing possibilities, considering consequences, making the kind of careful decision that had kept him alive and employed in a dangerous job. Okay, he said finally. Okay? Let's try. Let's see what happens when we don't have to whisper in the dark and steal touches through metal bars. I felt something in my chest expand, warm and bright and full of possibility. Really? Really? But Joshua, we take it slow. We figure it out as we go. And if it becomes clear that this was just the product of extreme circumstances, we walk away from each other with no hard feelings. Deal. Nicholas smiled then, the first completely unguarded expression I'd ever seen from him. So what do we do now? Now? Now we order coffee and talk like normal people. No guards, no security cameras, no countdown until you have to leave for rounds. I don't remember how to be normal people. Then we'll learn together. 6 months later, I was living in a small apartment downtown, working as a freelance forensic accountant helping law enforcement agencies investigate financial crimes. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wrongful conviction had actually led me to more meaningful work than I'd ever done before. Nicholas had transferred to a different facility to avoid any potential conflicts of interest, and we'd moved in together after 3 months of careful dating that slowly convinced us both that what we felt was real and lasting. We were different people outside the prison walls. I was less defensive, he was less controlled, but the connection between us had only grown stronger. We balanced each other in ways I never could have predicted, and every day I woke up grateful for the strange series of events that had brought us together. Any regrets? Nicholas asked one evening as we sat on our couch, his head on my shoulder, both of us reading our respective books in comfortable silence. About what? About any of it. The conviction, the prison time, everything that led us here. I considered the question seriously. 8 months of my life had been stolen from me. My reputation had been destroyed, and I'd endured trauma that would probably affect me for years to come. No, I said finally. I regret that an innocent man went to prison, but I can regret that it led me to you. Even though I'm a corrections officer who fell for an inmate? Even though that's probably the most ethically questionable foundation for a relationship in history? I laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. Especially because of that. Anyone can meet in a coffee shop or through friends. How many people can say they fell in love through prison bars? When you put it that way, we're either incredibly romantic or completely insane. Why not both? Nicholas lifted his head to look at me, his expression soft and content. I love you, Joshua, in case I don't say it enough. You say it plenty, but I love hearing it. I cupped his face in my hands. I love you too, and I love the life we're building together, even though it started in the worst possible circumstances. Because it started in the worst possible circumstances, we've already survived the hardest part. Everything else is just details. As I kissed him, tasting coffee and contentment and the promise of a future we were building together one day at a time, I marveled at how wrong I'd been about my life being over when those prison doors first closed behind me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads directly to the best thing. Sometimes love finds you in the most impossible places, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person who saves you turns out to be the person sometimes. If you're very lucky, the person who saves you turns out to be the person.